Thank you, Amos Gitai, for coming back to Stanford.
Pleasure.
For the second time.
It's a pleasure.
In 2 years. Last time you came to screen to present your movie Anna Arabia, and this time you came to present Rabin, The Last Day, which is an investigation of the last day of Yitzhak Rabin, the infamous day when he died on November the 4th, 1995. And in your movie, you revisit the murder scene, the causes and circumstances that leading up to his death. And so you did this movie, but you also do cinema by other means in trying to look at the assassination through an exhibition that you curated at the Maxi Museum in Roma. Then the exhibition traveled to the Musée des Beaux-Arts in Brussels, and you also conceptualized an installation in the Collection Lambert in Avignon. And you also adapted, with your screenwriter Marie-Josée Sanselme, you adapted the movie into a stage production, and you staged it in the Festival d'Avignon, in the Cour d'honneur du Palais des Papes. So this multi-faceted aspect of looking at Rabin was not the first time that you tried to dissect Israeli history, because you filmed Kedma, which is an investigation of the foundation of Israel in 1948. And in the movie Kippur, you also looked at the Kippur War and your own personal Kippur War. And in Disengagement, a movie you did with Juliette Binoche about 10 years ago, you also looked at the disengagement from Gaza by the Israeli army. And last but not least, in Promised Land, with Rosamund Pike and Anna Shigula and Anne Parillo, you looked at the networks of human trafficking and prostitution of Eastern European women through the Bedouin intermediaries in the Sinai Desert. So you, by looking both at the past and the present of Israeli society, do you feel like in a way you are the curator of your own society?
I mean, I don't know if a curator, but I'm just an architect. I studied by studying architecture not far from here.
Yes, in
my
Berkeley.
first degree is in Haifa, and then I continued my studies in Berkeley. So I was very interested in the question of form and narrative. And then later on, after I finished, and I spent almost 9 years to study different phases of architecture, I decided to do something else. And this something else is true what you say. It's about looking at the place that I was born, and which I think is a very strong story. Story of Israel is a very strong story. Looking at it not like a PR machine, but in a critical thought, and about each time about a different dimension of its contemporary history. So I think that through the film that you mentioned, and also some others, because I started out by doing documentaries before I did fiction films, and I like a lot documentaries, because to me documentaries are like archaeology. You excavate a certain reality. So to go back to your question of curatorship, so I started by excavating and discovering what I find in this cinematic archaeological procedure, let's say. And then later on I started to make fiction films. So for the fiction films, I also chose themes which are the main themes of preoccupied contemporary history, war, religion, intolerance, sometimes longing, utopia. All these are current themes of my work. In some way, maybe Jean-Michel Frodon said to me that he thinks that I have a kind of phantoms in the back of my mind, and they come back from time to time, and I'm interested to work and to create a new facet of this work.
Mm-hmm. And also the fact that you bring the present into the past of a movie, like in Rabin, the very end of Rabin, the end is about the images of the billboard posters of the re-election of Benjamin Netanyahu in 2015. So it seems that you really have a conscious way of wanting to insert the present into the past and the past into the present time. And we also see that in your fiction work, such as in Rosa Crédit, because the very ending also of Rosa Crédit, which takes place in the late 40s and 50s in France, ends in the years 2000 in Paris. So I was struck to see that both movies were done with the same cinematographer, Éric Gauthier, and there is a very special atmosphere in both endings.
It started by my first feature film, Esther, which also has an ending which is contemporary in a way. At the end, the actors tell their own biography. Then it was Berlin, Jerusalem, which also ended in the. It's around the figure of this expressionist Jewish poet from Germany, Elsa Lasker-Schiller, who immigrated after the climb to power of the Nazis, immigrated to Jerusalem and died in 1945. And the film ends by her meandering in the streets of Jerusalem. So I used this, and also in Eden, which I did with Arthur Miller, and also ends in contemporary. So sometimes I would say that the different films I did are like chapters of a diary. And the last shot is like when you finish a diary or you finish a chapter, you sign and you put the date. Mm-hmm. So they are like the dates. And then, like you mentioned, Rosa Crédit, and you mentioned also Rabin, but also other films. Sometimes I feel that it's necessary in order to create some sort of, some people would say Brechtian, but some sort of distance, mm-hmm. to reintegrate it into the contemporary context.
Okay. So in Rabin, it's the last shot, but also the first shot is the interview of Shimon Peres, which might be one of the last lengthy interviews that Peres did. And you offer that interview to the audience. And in a way, Rabin the Last Day could be seen as Peres the last interview. So I guess my question is, why did you choose to start the film with that interview?
Because, you know, the film is not only about Rabin, it's about really the brutal assassination of Rabin, which is a kind of a coup d'etat that the right wing did to Israeli politics, which succeeded because since then, more or less with some little intervals, they are in power. So it's an interval, it's a coup d'etat which worked. And I would say, in my mind, unfortunately, because I don't know where they are leading the country, these guys, like the collection of figures that Netanyahu brought to his government, who wants to limit the liberty of press, the liberty of creation, the freedom of speech, etc., in addition to prolonging and extending the occupation of the West Bank. Mm-hmm. So it is a kind of a civil act, this film. And I thought that it is right, to go back to your question, to start it with a conversation of the person who was the partner of Rabin when he went to sign with the Palestinians, which was Peres. And Peres was giving me this very long interview, which is actually much longer than what you see in the movie, in which we discussed some issues connecting to the assassination of Rabin. Mm-hmm. But the film is not built only on Rabin, it's really built on the assassination and the incitement to kill Rabin.
And the film is built on the transcript that you managed to obtain from the Shengar Commission. And in a way, it's also an adaptation of those written words of the Commission. So could you tell us a few words about the way you worked with the Commission?
No, we have been doing quite a big research with Rivka to try to trace all the incitement against Rabin. So we were helped by the Rabin Center, and then we went to the National Archive. But then I realized that some of the main testimonies of this commission were not open to the public. So I went to see the president of the commission, who was the president of the Supreme Court of Israel at the time. And I asked him if he could help open the protocols, because now it was the 20th anniversary of the killing, and he did. And actually this protocol served a lot. When we wrote later on the script, we translated, because I worked on the script with Marie-Josée Sancerre, so we translated it to English and then to French, and the protocols give us this kind of picture of all the people involved in the day of the assassination. But the research was also beyond it. It was also the testimony of the wife of Rabin, which later on also became the center of the play that you mentioned, because in a way the play, each discipline, on Rabin I did a project which had multi-presentations. So you mentioned that I did a film, then I did a series of exhibitions in Rome, in Brussels and in Avignon. So they are both working on the photographic presentation of the assassination and around it. It's both a video and photographic installation, and also some ceramic work that I did. And then there was the performance in the Palais des Papes in the Cour d'Honneur of Avignon, which is again different, because it's not adaptation of the movie, but it's more adaptation of the memories of Leah Rabin, the widow of Rabin, when she tells the story about his assassination. So in a way I took an event that I consider a mega event in the contemporary history, and I thought that it deserves not just a film, but a film mostly played by actors, more than 70 actors, then exhibition, then a play, and also a documentary in which I will edit the archives when I went with Rabin to Washington and Cairo. So in a way I was also interested in the same time as a Israeli citizen in the brutality of this assassination, but also what are the possible forms of representation of it.
And the play also has some reminiscence of a Greek tragedy, because you also inserted a choir in the play, and we can follow the play as the construction of a Greek tragedy, where you really targeting that tradition of staging the assassination of a leader on stage.
The assassination of Rabin in general has a mythological dimension, but I would insist on having a more rational political reading of it, Okay. But it's true that it had created resonances to also another work that I did, which is the adaptation of the Josephus Flavius text about the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans 70 BC. Because like Flavius wrote, the destruction of Jerusalem by the Romans was also a result of growing nationalism and a radicalization of the Jewish society in Jerusalem. So the resonances also can take a historical perspective, and this is one of the reasons that I was interested in Flavius. Anyway, Flavius, to go to another subject, Josephus is a very interesting figure because he again wrote the history of this period more than 2,000 years ago, not like a Greek mythology, not like a mythological, but like a journalist in a way, like an essayist. So he really describes the fortifications, the architecture, the size of the battle, and he gave in a way a key that even when I opened the newspaper this morning, I read that the archaeologists found exactly his description about the way that the emperor, the Roman emperor Titus, advanced to destroy the fortification of Jerusalem. So it is also interesting in another dimension. In a way, the destruction of Jerusalem and the sovereignty more than 2,000 years ago, one can say, was a result of the radical nationalist groups within the Jewish society at that time. But so it's kind of their victory in a way, ironically, one may say. They managed to bring upon themselves the destruction by making continuous provocations. But the war on memory was won by Josephus because he recorded for us how it happened. So in a way, even if they were victorious, the vision of the radicals, the ultranationalists, the anarchists of that time won, and they brought the destruction. Our collective memory today is influenced by a guy who was against it, because he's the only one who did the good work to record all these events. So I think that at this stage of history, when we are really losing the real battles on the real reality, because this kind of government that Netanyahu has is winning, and the opposition is very fragmented in Israel and not very effective, except some great, courageous human rights organizations, which are really courageous. So in the real world, we are losing. But that's why it's so important to make the battle on memory, because the memory also stays, like in the case of Flavius, when the real battle was lost.
So you are reasoning in a way like a historian who is looking at the longue durée and projecting the impact of the work you are doing with your movies, are trying to counterbalance the current situation. And
we have to. It's the only justification that I have a very bad pain in my hand is to do good work.
Okay, and in the movie, so as I said, it's the last interview of one of the last lengthy interviews of Shimon Peres. So with the death of Peres, the first chapter of Israeli history, in a way, is the closing of this first chapter. And I was wondering, I would like to quote a passage of the curator Hans Ulrich Obritz, who at the very end of his essay, Ways of Curating, quote the economist John Kenneth Galbraith in saying, the economist John Kenneth Galbraith once wrote that change comes not from men and women changing their minds, but from the change from one generation to the next. Is that true? How can we track this kind of change? Can we, in addition, help a new generation take advantage of their special historical circumstances? So my question is about the future now, looking forward and not backwards, but forward. What is next for you? How will you take the pulse of Israeli society from now on?
I think that culture and art, we are not there to a kind of a Michael Moore immediate reaction and very hermetic, indoctrinary documentaries. Because I think even when you try to do it for what is called the good cause, by the procedure of the filmmaking, it's not good. So you have in every artistic or filmatic work to give space to contradictions, and you cannot keep it as a linear argumentative thing, even if you think that it's very effective politically. I even doubt that it's so effective politically. I think that sometimes his direct intervention in politics or these kind of documentaries actually help to consolidate the opposite positions. I will wait for this truck because this is a real big truck.
Thank you.
And now he decided to park just in front of us, which is very unfriendly. Let's continue. So, and then you can take a cut of the truck. So, to answer your question, Marie-Pierre, let's take the metaphor. We have been talking, okay?
Yes.
It was relatively quiet with some little sound interference. Now suddenly comes this immense truck and disturbs our conversation.
Yes.
I mean, neither me and not you, because you are more intelligent, but even you could not have predicted that there will be a truck, right? Mm-hmm. But now it becomes part of what we are doing. This truck, we're making this noise and would refuse to move. Mm-hmm. So we cannot, if we do a very designed, okay, now good news, he switched off the motor, you know. But we could not have predicted first that he will come, mm-hmm. that he will stick exactly in front of where we do the conversation with his noise, and that he will even switch the motor, which is good news. So I think all of these are a parameter of reality. That's why it's not really recommendable to do. It's important to struggle against injustice, against abuse. This is important, but we cannot, in a definite way, have a vision of the future as if we know it already. We don't know it already.
But in your own work, how would you like to lead your own work now?
We'll speak about it next year.
Okay, thank you, Amos Gitai.
Thank you.